My brother secretly transferred Grandma's apartment to his name. He forgot one important detail. I'm Sienna, 29 years old, and I discovered my brother's betrayal at Grandma Rose's memorial service. The apartment was packed with mourners when Declan clinked his wine glass and announced he'd be selling his property within the month. Conversations died mid-sentence. Aunt Patricia's hand froze halfway to her mouth. I watched my brother's satisfied smirk as he surveyed the shocked faces, clearly enjoying the power of his announcement. He caught my eye across the room and raised his glass in mock salute. The room erupted in whispered protests. Cousin Marcus stepped forward, his voice tight with disbelief. Your property? Rose left specific instructions about the apartment going to Sienna. Declan's laugh was practiced, dismissive. Legally, it's mine. I have the deed right here. He pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket, waving them like a trophy. My mother reached for my arm, her grip desperate, but I remained perfectly still. I lifted my own glass, meeting Declan's triumphant gaze with a calm smile that made his expression flicker with confusion. The whispers intensified as I walked toward him, each step measured and deliberate. For 5 years, I had been Grandma Rose's primary caregiver while Declan pursued his real estate ventures in another state. I moved into her apartment when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, transforming the second bedroom into my office so I could work remotely. Every doctor's appointment, every medication adjustment, every 3 a.m. crisis when she wandered confused into the hallway, I handled it alone. Declan visited twice a year, always arriving with expensive gifts and theatrical affection that lasted exactly as long as it took to snap photos for social media. He would stay for a weekend, charm everyone with stories about his business success, then disappear back to his life. What he didn't know was that Grandma Rose had recognized his pattern long before the dementia took hold, and she had taken precautions. Growing up, Declan was the golden child who could do no wrong. 3 years older than me, he mastered the art of appearing responsible while actually doing nothing. Our parents praised his charisma while dismissing my quiet reliability as simply doing what was expected. When Grandma Rose first mentioned wanting to ensure her apartment went to the granddaughter who sacrificed her social life to care for her, I thought it was just grateful talk during one of her lucid moments. I never imagined she had already put legal measures in place. The apartment itself sat in a neighborhood that had transformed dramatically over the past decade. What was once a modest working-class area was now prime real estate, with developers salivating over every available property. Grandma Rose had lived there for 42 years, watching as luxury condos rose around her building like predatory giants. The entire block was under pressure to sell, with offers climbing higher each month. Declan had been aware of this opportunity for years, making his calculated move to secure the property all the more deliberate. My relationship with Declan had always been strained, but the distance grew unbridgeable during Grandma Rose's final year. He would call occasionally, always asking about her condition but never offering to help. "You're so much better at this caregiving thing," he would say smoothly. I wouldn't know what to do. His concern evaporated the moment our grandmother's cognitive decline meant she could no longer call him out on his absence. That's when he started visiting more frequently, always arriving with a lawyer or notary, papers that needed signing for her protection. I didn't discover the extent of his manipulation until after the funeral, when the lawyer executor read a will I had never seen. According to this document, signed just 3 months before her death, Grandma Rose had left the apartment entirely to Declan. The signature looked shaky but plausible, exactly what you'd expect from an 87-year-old woman with advancing dementia. My protest was met with sympathetic looks and legal jargon about mental competency and proper witnessing. Declan sat across from me in the lawyer's office, his expression a carefully constructed mask of regret. "I'm sorry it worked out this way," he had said, not meeting my eyes. "But you have to understand I'm the one with the business sense to handle this property properly." Grandma obviously recognized that. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably, shuffling papers while I sat in stunned silence. "You'll have 30 days to remove your belongings," Declan continued, his voice taking on the tone he used for tenants in his rental properties. That should be more than enough time. I had spent the following week in a fog of disbelief and grief, sorting through 5 years of memories while boxing up my life. Friends offered their spare rooms and condolences in equal measure. My mother kept calling, torn between loyalty to both her children, ultimately defaulting to the familiar pattern of supporting Declan's version of events. Maybe Rose really did change her mind, she suggested gently. Maybe she wanted to give him a chance to prove himself. But Grandma Rose and I had shared something that went beyond the daily routines of caregiving. During her lucid moments, which came less frequently as time passed, she would tell me stories about surviving as a widow, raising 3 children alone, refusing to let anyone push her around. "Documentation, Sienna," she told me once, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Always keep documentation. Words disappear, but papers survive." At the time, I thought she was rambling about old receipts or medical records. Now I understood she had been trying to tell me something crucial. The memorial service had been my idea, held in the apartment Declan now claimed as his own. I told him it would be easier than renting a venue, that Grandma Rose would have wanted people to gather in the home she loved. He agreed readily, already mentally calculating how showcasing the property would help establish his ownership in everyone's minds. He had even hired a cleaning service to make the place spotless, removing any trace of my 5-year residence with efficient brutality. As Declan finished his announcement about selling the apartment, I reached into my purse and pulled out my own envelope. The room's attention shifted as I opened it with deliberate slowness. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter on legal letterhead, dated 2 years before Grandma Rose's diagnosis. I had found it 3 days earlier, tucked inside her old jewelry box during my final packing, exactly where she told me in one of her last coherent conversations to look for something important. "Before everyone leaves," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room, "I think we should discuss the apartment's actual ownership." Declan's smirk faltered. I watched the color drain from his face as I unfolded the document, though he couldn't yet see what it contained. Grandma Rose was many things, but she wasn't careless, and she definitely wasn't forgetful. Not when it mattered. The paper in my hand represented years of my grandmother's foresight, her quiet determination to protect the granddaughter who had actually shown up. What Declan had forgotten, in his rush to forge signatures and manipulate a dying woman, was that Grandma Rose had learned documentation from her own mother, who had lost everything to a charming man with quick hands and quicker lies. My hands were steady as I held up the document for everyone to see, though my heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment that would define everything that came next, either the beginning of my vindication or the confirmation of my powerlessness. Declan's face cycled through emotions too quickly to catalog: confusion, dismissal, dawning concern, and finally something that looked like fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my other hand, stopping him. "This is a deed transfer," I announced clearly, "signed and notarized on March 15th, 3 years ago, before Grandma Rose showed any signs of cognitive decline, when her mental competency was absolutely unquestionable." I paused, letting the implications sink in. She transferred the apartment to me, with the explicit condition that the transfer wouldn't be recorded until after her death, to avoid exactly the kind of manipulation someone might attempt if they knew I was the legal owner. The silence that followed was absolute. Declan's face transitioned from pale confusion to angry red. "That's impossible," he sputtered, finally finding his voice. "I have the deed. I had it verified by 3 different lawyers." He pulled his own papers from his pocket again, but this time the gesture looked defensive rather than triumphant. "You have a deed that was forged using a woman with dementia," I replied calmly. "I have the original transfer that was executed when Grandma Rose was completely lucid, witnessed by her longtime attorney, Harrison Webb, and held in escrow specifically to prevent this exact scenario." I turned to address the room full of relatives and family friends. She knew someone might try to take advantage once she started declining. She just didn't know it would be her own grandson. Aunt Patricia stepped forward, her hand extended. "May I see that?" I handed her the document, watching as she read it carefully, her expression hardening with each line. She had been a paralegal for 30 years before retiring. "This is legitimate," she announced. "The notary seal is authentic. The witness signatures are proper, and the date proves Rose was completely competent when she signed it." She fixed Declan with a look of pure disgust. "What you have is worthless. Worse than worthless. It's evidence of elder abuse." Declan lunged forward as if to snatch the document from Patricia's hands, but Marcus blocked him. "Don't even think about it," my cousin warned. The memorial service had transformed into something else entirely. The mourners now witnesses to a family implosion. Several people had their phones out, recording everything. Declan seemed to realize this simultaneously, his jaw clenching as he forced himself to step back. "You're lying," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "You forged that. You're the one who spent years manipulating her, isolating her from family." His voice rose with each accusation. "I visited regularly. I brought her gifts. I showed her love while you just wanted her money." The accusation was so absurd that several people actually laughed. My mother pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with an emotion I couldn't quite read. "Declan, stop," she said quietly. "Just stop." She turned to me, and I saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "I knew," she whispered. "Your grandmother called me 2 years ago and told me what she'd done. She made me promise not to tell anyone. Said it needed to stay secret to be effective." She said Declan had already started asking suspicious questions about her assets. This revelation clearly shocked Declan more than my document. "Mom, you knew and didn't tell me?" The betrayal in his voice would have been touching if it weren't so thoroughly hypocritical. "I'm your son. You're supposed to support me." "I support the truth," my mother replied, her voice stronger now. "And the truth is that Sienna gave up 5 years of her life to care for Rose while you showed up for photo opportunities. Rose was crystal clear about what she wanted and why. She said she'd rather see the apartment burn down than let you profit from her death while Sienna got nothing." The memorial guests were no longer pretending to give us privacy. This was better than any reality show, and I could see phones lighting up as people texted others about what was happening. Declan's carefully constructed image as the successful, devoted grandson was disintegrating in real time. His face had gone from red to almost purple, veins visible at his temples. "This isn't over," he hissed at me. I'll fight this. I have lawyers who will tear apart your fraudulent claims." But his voice shook, and everyone in the room could hear the desperation underneath the threats. He turned to leave, nearly knocking over one of Grandma Rose's antique vases in his haste to escape the staring faces. "Declan," I called after him, my voice stopping him at the door. "You should probably know. Grandma Rose didn't just transfer the apartment to me. She left detailed journals documenting every visit you made, every conversation you had, every time you brought papers for her to sign." I paused, letting that sink in, especially the visits from the last 6 months of her life when you thought she was too far gone to understand what was happening. She was gone, but I was there, and I took notes too. His hand gripped the doorframe so tightly his knuckles went white. "What do you want?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "I want you to experience exactly what you tried to do to me," I said simply. "I want you to lose everything you thought you'd won, and I want you to know that Grandma Rose planned this, foresaw your greed, and made sure you'd face consequences." I gestured around the apartment he'd already mentally spent a dozen times over. "This was never going to be yours." She made certain of that the moment she saw who you really were. The next morning, I filed the deed with the county recorder's office. The clerk who processed the paperwork raised her eyebrows when she saw the date and the escrow conditions, but confirmed everything was in perfect legal order. The recording made my ownership official and public record, effectively nullifying whatever forged documents Declan had obtained. By noon, I received the first of what would become many angry text messages from my brother. "You've destroyed our family over money. Hope you're proud." I didn't respond. Instead, I called Harrison Webb, Grandma Rose's attorney who had witnessed the original deed transfer. He was 83 now, mostly retired, but he remembered the transaction vividly. "Rose was one of the sharpest people I've ever known," he told me over the phone. "She came to my office with a stack of documents, medical records, cognitive tests, even a notarized statement from her doctor certifying her mental competency on the day of signing. She said someone was going to try to challenge this eventually, and she wanted to make absolutely certain it would hold up. What I hadn't shared at the memorial service was the extent of Grandma Rose's preparation. She hadn't just transferred the apartment to me. She had created a comprehensive paper trail documenting Declan's financial manipulation attempts dating back 3 years. Every suspicious phone call, every unexpected visit with important papers, every time he'd tried to discuss her estate planning without me present. She documented it all in journals she kept hidden in her bedroom closet. I spent that entire week reading through her meticulous records. Her handwriting started out firm and clear, deteriorating slowly over the months as her disease progressed, but the content remained devastatingly precise. She had recorded conversations where Declan tried to convince her I was stealing from her, dates when he'd forged her signature on bank documents, even transcripts of calls where he'd posed as her to financial institutions. The woman might have been losing her memory, but she never lost her understanding of human nature. On the 4th day after the memorial, Declan showed up at the apartment with 2 lawyers and a court order demanding access to his property. I met them at the door with my own attorney, Maya Chen, a property law specialist I'd retained immediately after recording the deed. Maya was 5 feet tall, looked about 12 years old, and had a reputation for eviscerating opposing counsel so thoroughly they considered career changes. "Your client has no legal standing here," Maya informed Declan's lead attorney, a man named Bradford, who clearly charged by the hour and the intimidation tactic. "My client's deed predates his by 3 years, was executed when the grantor had full mental capacity, and has now been properly recorded. Whatever documents your client obtained are legally meaningless." Bradford tried to bluster about competing claims and investigation into the validity, but Maya cut him off. "Are you suggesting that Harrison Webb, who has practiced law in this county for 60 years, participated in forging a deed? Because that's what you'd need to prove. Or perhaps you'd like to explain how your client obtained a deed from a woman with advanced Alzheimer's without exploiting her condition." Declan tried to push past us into the apartment, but I stood my ground. "You're trespassing," I said clearly. "You have no right to be here. Leave now or I'll call the police." Behind me, I had strategically positioned Marcus and 2 of my cousins, all of whom looked more than happy to physically escort my brother off the property if necessary. "This is insane!" Declan exploded. "That apartment is worth $2 million. You can't just steal it from me." The words came out before he could stop himself, revealing exactly what this had always been about. Not grief over losing Grandma Rose, not sentiment about the family home, just the dollar amount he'd calculated in his spreadsheets. "I'm not stealing anything," I replied. "I'm keeping what was legally given to me by a woman who saw through you long before the rest of us did." I pulled out my phone and opened my voice recorder app. "But please, continue threatening me in front of witnesses and your own legal counsel. I'm sure that will help your case tremendously." Bradford grabbed Declan's arm, finally recognizing the hole his client was digging. "We're leaving. This isn't over, Ms. Sienna, but this particular confrontation is pointless." As they retreated down the hallway, I heard Declan screaming at his lawyers, his voice echoing off the walls all the way to the elevator. That evening, my mother called. "Declan's been contacting everyone in the family, trying to turn them against you. He's telling people you manipulated Rose, that you forged documents, that you're destroying his life out of jealousy." She sighed heavily. "Most people aren't buying it, especially after what happened at the memorial. But some of his friends and your father's side of the family are starting to ask questions." "Let them ask," I said. "I have documentation for everything. Legal documentation, medical documentation, financial documentation." Grandma Rose made sure of that. I paused, considering my next move. Actually, maybe it's time everyone saw exactly what Declan was doing during those visits. "Would you be willing to help me organize a family meeting?" My mother was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure? Once you show people what he did, there's no taking it back. He's still your brother." The words came out tentatively, but I could hear the resolution underneath. She already knew this needed to happen. He stopped being my brother when he decided to steal from a dying woman and frame me for trying to help her. I replied, "I'm tired of protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. It's time the family saw who he really is." 3 days later, 27 family members gathered in Aunt Patricia's living room. I had prepared packets for each person: photocopies of Grandma Rose's journals, bank statements showing Declan's unauthorized transactions, and the most damning evidence of all: security camera footage from the nursing aide I'd hired during Grandma Rose's worst months. The aide had installed discreet cameras after noticing Declan going through files when he thought no one was watching. The footage was devastating. It showed Declan forging Grandma Rose's signature on multiple documents, taking jewelry from her dresser, and in one particularly ugly scene, trying to convince her that I had been stealing her money. "Your granddaughter is robbing you blind," his voice on the recording said. "You need to sign this power of attorney so I can protect you." Grandma Rose, confused and frightened, had cried, and I had to pause the video because several family members were crying too. When the presentation finished, the room sat in stunned silence. Finally, my Uncle Thomas stood up. "I need to apologize to you, Sienna. I believed Declan when he said you were manipulating Rose. I thought he was just trying to protect her estate. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Others echoed his sentiment, shamefaced and angry at themselves for being deceived. My phone buzzed with a text from Declan. "What are you doing? Why are people calling me screaming about videos?" I smiled and typed back, "Just sharing Grandma Rose's documentation. The truth tends to upset people who've been lying." The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Declan sued me for elder abuse, claiming I had isolated Grandma Rose and coerced her into signing documents against her will. His new legal team, more expensive and aggressive than his first, filed motions demanding psychological evaluations and questioning my fitness to have been a caregiver. They subpoenaed my financial records, employment history, and even my medical records, looking for anything to support their narrative of manipulation. Maya filed a countersuit the same day for elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, and emotional distress. "We're not playing defense anymore," she told me in her office, her expression fierce despite her youthful appearance. "Your brother committed multiple felonies against a vulnerable adult. I've already contacted the district attorney's office about potential criminal charges." The court date for the preliminary hearing arrived on a gray morning in March. I walked into the courtroom with Maya, my mother, Aunt Patricia, and Harrison Webb, who had insisted on testifying despite his age. Declan sat at the plaintiff's table with his 3 attorneys, looking haggard. He'd lost weight, I noticed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Good. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Elizabeth Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular hatred of elder abuse cases. She reviewed the case files with increasingly dark expressions as both sides presented their opening arguments. When Declan's lead attorney started describing me as a calculating manipulator who isolated a vulnerable woman, Judge Martinez held up her hand. "Counselor, I've reviewed the evidence packets both sides submitted. Before we go any further, I need clarification on something." She looked directly at Declan. "Mr. Declan, you visited your grandmother how many times in the year before her death?" Declan's attorney jumped in. "Your Honor, the frequency of visits isn't relevant to the validity of property transfer documents." "I'll decide what's relevant," Martinez snapped. "Answer the question, Mr. Declan." I visited regularly," Declan stammered, "as often as my work schedule allowed. According to the visitor logs from the care facility and the security footage submitted by the defense, you visited 8 times in 12 months. Each visit lasted less than 2 hours, and 5 of those visits included attempts to have your grandmother sign financial documents." Judge Martinez's voice was ice. "Meanwhile, the defendant lived with your grandmother full-time, managed her medical care, and documented every single one of your visits. Would you like to revise your characterization of who was isolating whom?" The hearing went downhill for Declan from there. Harrison Webb testified about the original deed transfer, presenting the medical evaluations and competency assessments. The doctor who had certified Grandma Rose's mental state took the stand and confirmed she had been entirely lucid and clear about her intentions. Aunt Patricia testified about the family dynamics and Declan's notorious absences during difficult caregiving periods. Then Maya played the security footage. The courtroom watched in silence as Declan systematically attempted to defraud his dying grandmother. When the video showed him pocketing a diamond bracelet, Judge Martinez's expression could have frozen lava. When it showed him trying to convince Grandma Rose that I was stealing from her, 2 jury members visibly recoiled. Your Honor, Maya stood, her voice clear and strong. The evidence shows a clear pattern of financial exploitation. My client's brother didn't just attempt to steal property, he engaged in elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. We're requesting full dismissal of the plaintiff's case, sanctions against the plaintiff and his attorneys for bringing a frivolous lawsuit, and referral to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Declan's attorney tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, our client was merely trying to protect family assets from what he believed was undue influence, but the words sounded hollow even as he said them. The evidence was too overwhelming, the video too damning. Judge Martinez didn't deliberate long. I'm dismissing the plaintiff's case with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Declan from coming within 500 feet of the defendant or the property in question. The evidence packet will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. She looked directly at Declan. You should have visited your grandmother more when she was alive. You might have realized she was a lot sharper than you gave her credit for. The criminal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. The district attorney, a woman named Rebecca Chen, who had built her career prosecuting financial crimes against the elderly, personally took charge of the case. Within 6 weeks, Declan was indicted on 14 counts, including elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception. The preliminary hearing for the criminal case drew media attention. A local news station had picked up the story, framing it as "Devoted Granddaughter Exposes Brother's Scheme to Steal Inheritance." Reporters waited outside the courthouse as I arrived with Maya. Inside, Declan sat at the defense table looking nothing like the confident real estate developer who had announced his plans to sell the apartment at Grandma Rose's memorial. He'd aged years in months. Rebecca Chen methodically presented the evidence. Bank statements showing Declan had attempted to transfer funds from Grandma Rose's accounts, forged signatures on multiple documents, text messages to associates discussing the apartment's market value and his plans to cash out as soon as possible. And most devastatingly, a recording that Grandma Rose's nursing aide had made of Declan trying to convince his grandmother to sign a new will, leaving everything to him. "Please, Grandma," his voice on the recording pleaded. "Sienna doesn't care about you. She's just waiting for you to die so she can take everything. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who's been protecting you." The audio quality was crystal clear, as was Grandma Rose's confused, frightened response. "But Sienna takes care of me. She's here every day because she wants your money. Sign this, Grandma. Let me protect you from her." The recording continued for another agonizing 3 minutes, with Declan's voice becoming increasingly aggressive as Grandma Rose became more upset. When it finally ended, several people in the courtroom were crying. The judge called a recess, and I saw Declan's attorneys huddling frantically, clearly discussing a plea deal. During the break, my mother approached me in the hallway. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Your father and I are divorcing." The statement shocked me. They'd been married for 34 years. "I can't stay with someone who defends what Declan did. Your father thinks we should support him no matter what. That family means protecting each other even when they're wrong. I finally understand that's not support, it's enabling." When court reconvened, Declan's attorney requested a private conference with the judge and prosecutor. 20 minutes later, they emerged with an offer. Declan would plead guilty to 6 counts in exchange for the other 8 being dismissed. He would receive 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, and be required to pay full restitution to me for legal fees and emotional distress, a sum his attorney had calculated at $375,000. Rebecca Chen addressed the court. "The state believes this plea agreement serves justice while acknowledging the defendant's cooperation. However, we want the victim's input." She looked at me. "Ms. Sienna, this is your decision. Maya and I had discussed this possibility. What happens if we reject the plea?" I asked. "Then we proceed to trial, which could take 8 to 12 months and would put you through extensive testimony. If convicted on all counts, he faces up to 20 years. I looked at Declan, who was staring at the defense table, unable to meet my eyes. 20 years seemed appropriate for what he'd done, for the betrayal and the cruelty. But I thought about Grandma Rose, about the quiet satisfaction she'd felt in planning her protection of me. She hadn't wanted revenge for its own sake. She'd wanted justice and accountability. "I'll agree to the plea on one condition," I said. "In addition to the restitution, Declan must publicly admit what he did." A statement published in the local newspaper, read in this courtroom, acknowledging his crimes and apologizing not to me, but to Grandma Rose. Declan's head snapped up, horror on his face. The public humiliation clearly terrified him more than prison time, his attorney whispered frantically in his ear. But Rebecca Chen smiled. I think that's more than reasonable. Mr. Declan? For a long moment, I thought he would refuse. Then his shoulders slumped in defeat. I agree. 3 days later, I sat in the same courtroom and listened as Declan read his statement. I systematically exploited and abused my grandmother Rose during the final year of her life. I forged documents, attempted to steal her property, and manipulated her confusion for financial gain. I tried to turn her against the granddaughter who actually cared for her, while I only cared about her assets. I betrayed her trust, violated her vulnerability, and dishonored her memory. There is no excuse for what I did. Rose deserved better than the grandson I proved to be. His voice broke on the final words, but I felt no sympathy. The newspaper published his statement alongside the full story the following Sunday. His business partners saw it. His clients saw it. Everyone in our community saw exactly who Declan had become. The judge sentenced him that same afternoon. As bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. I met his gaze steadily, my expression neutral. He had expected me to crumble under his manipulation, to give in to family pressure, to prioritize his reputation over the truth. He had gambled everything on my inability to fight back. Grandma Rose had known better. 2 years have passed since Declan went to prison. The apartment that he schemed to steal is now fully mine, renovated and updated. I kept Grandma Rose's bedroom exactly as it was, transforming it into a small reading nook filled with her favorite books and the journals she left behind. Sometimes I sit there and imagine her satisfaction at how everything unfolded. The property value has increased to $3 million, though I have no intention of selling. Several developers have made increasingly aggressive offers, but I've declined them all. This apartment represents something far more valuable than money. It's proof that planning, documentation, and truth ultimately defeat manipulation and greed. Declan was released on parole last month after serving 18 months. His real estate license was revoked permanently, his business partnerships dissolved, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. He's working as a clerk at a hardware store, living in a studio apartment on the opposite side of the city. According to my mother, who maintains minimal contact with him, he's bitter and blames me for ruining his life. My mother, meanwhile, has flourished since her divorce. She moved into a condo downtown, returned to school to finish the degree she abandoned when she got married, and recently started dating a retired teacher who treats her with genuine respect. I spent 34 years making excuses for people's bad behavior, she told me over coffee last week. Watching you refuse to do that gave me permission to stop. Aunt Patricia and I have grown closer. She helped me establish a small scholarship fund in Grandma Rose's name for students studying elder care and gerontology. We review applications together twice a year, choosing recipients who demonstrate the kind of practical compassion that Grandma Rose valued. Last week, I received a letter from Declan. It was forwarded through his parole officer, as the restraining order technically remains in effect. The letter was 3 pages of self-pitying complaints about his circumstances, passive-aggressive accusations about my vindictiveness, and a final paragraph suggesting that perhaps we could move past this if I helped him get back on his feet financially. I read it once, then fed it through the paper shredder without responding. Grandma Rose taught me that some people never learn from their mistakes. They only learn to resent the people who hold them accountable. Declan still saw himself as the victim, still believed he deserved the wealth he'd tried to steal, still couldn't comprehend that consequences were the direct result of his choices. The apartment where this all began is quiet tonight. I'm sitting on the balcony where Grandma Rose used to drink her morning coffee, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on as evening settles in. The developers are still circling, the offers still arriving in my mailbox, but this place is worth more than they could ever pay. This apartment represents a battle won, not just for property, but for truth against lies, accountability against entitlement, and justice against manipulation. Every time I unlock this door, I'm reminded that Grandma Rose saw what others missed, planned what others didn't anticipate, and protected what truly mattered. Declan lost everything he schemed to steal and destroyed everything he had in the attempt. He sits now in his small apartment, working a job he considers beneath him, watching the life he'd planned crumble around him. Meanwhile, I'm living in the home that was always meant to be mine, surrounded by memories of the woman who loved me enough to ensure I'd never be vulnerable to predators, even when that predator shared our blood. Some people call it revenge. I call it exactly what Grandma Rose intended: the natural consequences of betraying someone who saw you coming long before you made your move. The apartment is mine. The documentation is sealed in official records that can never be challenged, and my brother's reputation is permanently marked by his own actions. He wanted $2 million and considered me an obstacle easily removed. He ended up with nothing, while I inherited not just property, but the profound satisfaction of watching a carefully planned manipulation collapse under the weight of truth. Grandma Rose would have appreciated the irony. The man who thought himself so clever, outsmarted by an elderly woman with Alzheimer's, and the granddaughter he thought was too soft to fight back. I raise my coffee cup in a silent toast to her memory. She taught me that real strength isn't isn't about being liked or keeping the peace. It's about documentation, preparation, and the willingness to let people face exactly what they've earned. Declan earned every single consequence that found him, and I sleep perfectly well at night knowing I gave him exactly what he deserved.